Our speaker is Ian Skoggard from Human Relations Area Files at Yale University, United States. Today, he presents his talk on the topic Symbolic Representations of the Love Act Across Cultures. Ian Skoggard is a research anthropologist at the Human Relations Area Files at Yale University. He is a graduate of the PhD program in anthropology at the City University of New York. He did his fieldwork in Taiwan and has written on rural industrialization, new religions, affect, love, and the evolution of cooperation. Presently, he is working on cross-cultural studies of food inequality, deference, and religiosity. Today, he will give a talk on the topic, Symbolic Representations of the Love Act Across Cultures.
Contents, although this is a cross-cultural study, today I'll be only talking about 3 cultures. It's very preliminary. The Turkana in East Africa, the First Nations in Northwest Coast, North America, the Aranda in Central Australia. I'll have a brief introduction and brief conclusion. In the philosopher Irving Singer's 3-volume work, The Nature of Love, he lists 5 criteria of romantic love. 1, sexual love between any 2 persons is in itself something splendid and ideal worth striving for. 2, love ennobles both the lover and the beloved. 3, being an ethical and aesthetic attainment, sexual love cannot be reduced to the mere libidinal impulse. 4, love pertains to courtesy and courtship, but is not necessarily related to the institution of marriage. And 5, love is an intense, passionate relationship that establishes a holy oneness between any 2 persons. In this presentation, I mostly focus on number 5, the passion and holy oneness of 2 people in love. While Singer writes that, quote, sexual love cannot be reduced to the mere libidinal impulse, item number 3, I would argue that the libido is nevertheless a powerful psychic driver, and that the act of lovemaking helps to achieve the perception of holy oneness between any 2 persons. In this paper, I discuss symbolic objects that index this lovemaking. The psychological anthropologist Geza Rohem says that, quote, good feeling creates a good object, unquote. I argue that this is true in the case of feelings associated with lovemaking. Such feelings can make good ritual objects, which then can be used for other purposes. The American anthropologist Walter Goldschmidt called rituals the language of sentiment and the second mode of communication. Ritual extends sentiments, in this case love, across wider social contexts and works to cement together the larger social body. Here's a simplistic model of love or romantic love. In this model, I see the body, self, and mind, and its 3 subjective states of desire, love, and the eternal. The intermediate component of self and love are, I see, in tension with the bodily desires on one end, effective pole, and the other cognitive ideations. It is the tension between desire and the eternal that creates love and the self. The mind includes the cosmological, mythical, ideological, those cognitive elements that can hold onto and encode bodily feelings. This is all I want to say about theory. I don't want to overthink it, and I ask, or us follow it. Rather, let's think in terms of images and symbols, as is done in all pre-literate oral cultures. And I'll follow with 3 examples. My first example of love symbols comes from the work of Norwegian anthropologist Vigdis Brostur. She did her fieldwork among the Turkana, a nomadic pastoralists of the Rift Valley in northwestern Kenya. She did her dissertation at the University of Bergen in Norway, where she is a professor now. Her interest was the linkages between symbolic form and its social, economic, and political conditions and contexts, with a focus on the process of change. Interestingly, she married a Turkanan man. The two Turkana symbols of love, according to Brosh-Dürer, are Tiangu and Akiram. The image on the left is a representation of Tiangu, which means a wild reproducing animal. It is also, Brosh-Dürer writes, quote, a figure of speech for both human vagina and penis, conceived as linked in a single form. This metaphor creates a multiple image, momentarily eclipsing differences not only between animals and humans, but also between men and women, unquote. For the Turkana, according to Brosh-Dürer, quote, the person is not a unitary, bounded entity, but plural and permeable, unquote. The three objects on the right are milk jars called akiram, which are symbols of Tiangu. The shape of the akiram has the properties of both genders, the phallic-shaped neck and the round bottom of the jug, signifying the breast, womb, vagina. Brosh-Dürer writes, quote, its form copies of procreative organs of the spouses in a single form, unquote. I would add that it also invokes a union of lovemaking and memories of feelings associated with lovemaking. Another meaning of the word akira means to pass down, and as Brosh-Dürer writes, it's a metaphor for the combined lines of descent which converge in the child from mother and father. This is an example of the extension of sentiments associated with lovemaking outward to include the descent group. The akiram is a prized possession of Turkana women. As you can see in the photo on the right, photo on the left, the akiram is a fairly large object. In the photo on the right is a Turkana woman milking a camel. Note that she holds the milk jug now in two parts, using the neck to receive the milk from the cow, which she'll then pour into the bottom part of the jug to store. According to Brosh-Dürer, milk is symbolic of social relationships in bringing together spouses, siblings, and friends in relations of consumption. My next example of love symbols comes from the work of Canadian anthropologist Wilson Duff. Born in 1925 in Vancouver, he did his fieldwork in 1949 and 1950 among the Coast Salish people, the Cowichan on Vancouver Island. He had a master's degree in the University of Washington and was a curator of anthropology at the Provincial Museum in Victoria, BC. Sadly, he committed suicide at the age of 51. Duff was an early advocate of First Nation rights. His article on Indigenous place names helped to establish their claims to territories which are never ceded in a treaty. He also championed First Nation people's roles in the curation of museum collections and exhibitions. His great interest was in Northwest Coast art, which he promoted as a fine art. He had a strong desire to push for deeper interpretations of the art, more than only a description of its form or representation. He had a saying that nothing comes in pieces. And I think he's referring to the metonymic properties of symbols. That is, any object is part of a larger story. While Northwest Coast art images could represent totemic crests, spirit creatures, or be purely aesthetic objects, Duff believed that they also invoked the taboo realm of the sacred and sexuality. For Duff, the raven's beak or the mouth of a toad were more than a beak or a mouth. According to Duff, this wooden dish of a raven with its concave back and protruding beak is, quote, a vulvic phallic image. I would argue here that the vulvic phallic image is a symbol of lovemaking that unifies and transcends gender and evokes the joys and bliss of lovemaking. This raven rattle is a more explicit depiction of the love of the sex act, a human figure with legs spread apart and his tongue entwined with the tongue of a raven. Wilson Duff also considered the totem pole as a vulvic phallic symbol, with the phallic totem pole and the vulvic doorway into the lodge, which was the home, and you might say womb, of the descent group. This is another example of extending the unifying sentiments of love, of the love act, to the building's occupants and the clan as a whole. The third and final example I will discuss today is from the ethnography of Hungarian psychological anthropologist Géza Rohem. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. He was the first professor of anthropology at the University of Budapest. In 1919, he also studied psychoanalysis. He did his fieldwork in Central Australia, also Melanesia and East Africa. He immigrated to the United States in 1939, and he taught and published outside of the academy. He brought a classic Freudian framework to the interpretation of Australian indigenous culture, working among the Aranda of Central Australia. For Rohem, Aranda totemic myths and rituals are full of sexual imagery. The walkabout itself is construed as a sexual act, the male trekker penetrating the female landscape, leaving behind spirit children. These photos of initiation rites or totemic rites show the phallic hero Malpunga on the left, who walks with his large penis sometimes slung over his shoulder. In the center is a ritual pole, also a phallic symbol, but planted in the female earth. Together they symbolize coitus, according to Rohem. He writes, quote, "They all cling to the ceremonial pole, the paternal penis, and sink into the earth. He describes how soft the earth was where he went in, how good it was to sink into it, and how he felt chippa chippa. To be chippa chippa means, to be happy, a state of rapturous delight, ecstasy, as for the instance in coitus." The photo at the top right is a hole from which the ancestors originally emerge and into which they will return. The bottom right shows the Churunga images painted on the backs of ritual participants. Here are examples of Churungas which are made at the birth of a child, a male or female, and another one is made at the child's initiation rite. The first Churunga is painted on wood or inscribed on stone and kept hidden in the ancestral cave. The second Churunga is given at the time of initiation. According to Rohem, its concentric circles depict the womb, navel, and vagina, which are drawn on the phallic-like Churunga. This is another vulvic phallic form. The ritual hole in the ground and the ancestral cave and concentric circles all represent the female genital organ, and the rites associated with them represent birth or coitus. These images also have a geographical and mythic reference guiding the Aranda through his clan history and territory. I'd like to conclude this talk with three final images that depict lovemaking. Wilson Duff was ridiculed for having a one-track mind, seeing too much sex in Northwest Coast art. I've tried to, in this paper, to show that he was not alone. Other anthropologists also saw sexual imagery in the objects of the cultures they have studied. Another example here is this image of a Tsimshian stone-faced mask with closed eyes. The mask was carved in stone. Mask carved in stone fits my simple model of the three dimensions of romantic love, the body, self, and mind, or cosmos. The face is that part of the body that is an expression of the self, while the cosmos is depicted in the internal quality of stone. What struck me about this mask is its resemblance to a face of the French sculptor Auguste Rodin, famous for sensual and sexual sculptures. Rodin's head is an ambiguous expression of yearning, vulnerability, sorrow, and pain. Might it also depict rapture associated with making love and being in love? I wonder. The last image I want to leave you with is Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, one of the most famous images in Western art. For me, her enigmatic smile depicts post-coital bliss and sacred feelings that makes the world go round. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.